The moment Sergeant Dale Pruitt pulled his cruiser behind the silver Lexus on Route 17, he had already made up his mind about the driver. He hadn't run the plates yet, hadn't clocked a moving violation. The car hadn't swerved, hadn't rolled a stop sign, hadn't done a single thing wrong in the 4 blocks he'd been tailing it. But the car was expensive. The neighborhood was what Pruitt called transitional. And the woman behind the wheel was black. In Pruitt's 12 years on the Hargrove County Sheriff's Department, that equation had always added up to something worth investigating. He flicked on the lights. Inside the Lexus, Lieutenant Colonel Evelyn Darko-Mensah pressed her lips together, checked her mirrors, and pulled over with the calm of someone who had navigated far worse situations than a traffic stop on a Tuesday afternoon. She had been driving home from Fort Langston, still in her civilian clothes, dark slacks, a pressed cream blouse, after a meeting that had run 3 hours longer than scheduled. She was tired. Her shoulder ached from an old injury that always flared in humid weather. All she wanted was a cup of tea and the particular silence of her own house. She lowered her window and waited. Pruitt approached slowly, one hand resting on his belt. His partner, Deputy Kevin Farris, hung back by the cruiser, arms crossed, watching with the detached interest of a man who had done this 100 times and found it unremarkable every single time. "License and registration," Pruitt said. "No greeting, no explanation." Evelyn reached into the glove box without rushing, produced both documents, and handed them through the window. "Can I ask what the stop is for, officer?" Pruitt studied the license for a moment longer than necessary. "We've had reports of a vehicle matching this description involved in a break-in 2 streets over." Evelyn looked at him steadily. "A silver Lexus." "That's right. There are probably 40 silver Lexuses in this county." Pruitt's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." She stepped out. She stood straight, shoulders back, the posture of someone who had stood at attention for decades, not from nerves, but from discipline so deep it had become structural. Pruitt noticed the posture. He didn't like it. In his experience, people who stood like that when being questioned thought they were better than the situation. He decided she needed to understand that she wasn't. "Turn around, hands on the roof." "I haven't been told why I'm being detained," Evelyn said. Her voice was even. Not confrontational, not pleading, simply precise. "I said turn around." Farris had drifted closer now, 2 against 1, badge against civilian. He positioned himself on Evelyn's left side while Pruitt moved behind her, and before she had fully processed what was happening, she felt the cold band of a handcuff snap around her right wrist. This was the moment. Not the stop, not the questioning. This was the moment that would determine everything that came after. And neither Pruitt nor Farris had any idea what they had just done. Evelyn Darko-Mensah did not shout. She did not struggle. She stood very still while Pruitt secured the second cuff, and she said, in the same measured tone she might use to brief a room full of officers, "I want you to understand that I am cuffed on a public street with no stated probable cause. You'll both want to remember this moment." Pruitt snorted. Noted. He walked her to the cruiser and had her sit in the back seat while Farris searched her vehicle. The search took 11 minutes. It turned up nothing, because there was nothing to find. No stolen property, no contraband, nothing that bore any resemblance to whatever vague reports had supposedly triggered this stop. Farris came back to the cruiser and gave Pruitt a look that communicated this plainly. Pruitt leaned against the door. "Where are you coming from today?" "I'd like to make a phone call," Evelyn said. "You're not under arrest." "Then remove the handcuffs and let me go." A pause. Pruitt recalibrated. He was starting to feel the first faint edge of something he wouldn't have called doubt. He didn't doubt himself, that wasn't his nature, but something adjacent to it. A slight reconsideration of the math. "Where are you coming from?" he asked again. "A phone call," she said again. "Or the handcuffs come off." He didn't remove them, but he also didn't push the question again. Instead, he stepped away from the cruiser and conferred with Farris in low tones. Evelyn watched them through the window. She had dealt with men like these before. Not the individual men, but the type, the kind who confused authority with correctness, who had learned that a uniform was usually enough to end an argument before it started. This time, it wasn't going to be enough. She had her personal cell phone in her jacket pocket. Pruitt had taken her purse and set it on the trunk of the Lexus during the search, but he hadn't patted her down, and the phone had remained in her pocket throughout. She pressed the side button 3 times, the emergency shortcut she had configured years ago, more out of professional habit than any specific expectation that she'd need it. The call connected automatically. They rang twice. Colonel Darko-Mensah. The voice on the other end was male, military crisp. "Go ahead." "I'm in the back of a Hargrove County Sheriff's cruiser," she said at a volume she made no effort to lower. "Route 17 near the intersection with Callaway. Handcuffed. No stated probable cause, no charges, no Miranda. The stop has been running approximately 22 minutes. A brief pause on the line. When the voice returned, it had shifted, still calm but carrying a different weight. "We have your location. Stay on the line." Outside the cruiser, Pruitt had turned toward the sound of her voice. Through the glass, he saw her looking directly at him, phone to her ear, speaking with the unhurried composure of someone filing a report. Not begging, not crying, not doing any of the things people in the back seat of his cruiser usually did. He walked back and opened the door. "Who are you talking to?" "The duty officer at the Joint Operations Center, Fort Langston," Evelyn said. "Would you like to speak with him?" She held out the phone. Pruitt stared at it. He did not take it. His hand, the one that had snapped the cuffs on without hesitation 20 minutes ago, stayed at his side. "What did you say your name was?" he asked, and something in his voice had changed. Not an apology. Not yet. More like the first crack in a load-bearing wall. "I didn't," Evelyn said. "You have my license. It has my name on it." He went back to the cruiser's front seat, ran the name. What came back on his screen was not what he expected. He sat with it for a long moment, reading the same information twice, the way a person reads a text that doesn't make sense the first time. Lieutenant Colonel Evelyn Darko-Mensah, United States Army, assigned to the office of the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations and Plans at Fort Langston. 18 years of service. Commendation Medal. Meritorious Service Medal. Twice. 1 tour in Afghanistan. 1 in Iraq. Security clearance at a level that Pruitt, in 12 years of law enforcement, had never encountered on a traffic stop in his life. He looked at Farris. Farris looked back at him. Neither of them said anything, because there wasn't anything to say that wasn't an indictment. Pruitt got out of the cruiser and opened the back door. He removed the handcuffs himself, quickly, without making eye contact. "You're free to go, ma'am." Evelyn stepped out and straightened her blouse. There was a red mark on her left wrist where the cuff had pressed too tightly. She looked at it briefly, then looked at Pruitt. "You'll want to document this stop thoroughly," she said. "Both of you." She collected her purse from the trunk of the Lexus, got into her car, and drove away. She did not speed. She did not run a single red light on the way home. What happened next unfolded the way consequences tend to unfold when they've been a long time coming, not with a single dramatic event, but with a quiet, grinding accumulation of accountability. The call had stayed connected throughout the encounter. The duty officer at Fort Langston had patched it to his supervisor within 4 minutes of Evelyn's initial report. That supervisor, a full colonel with direct access to the post commander, had begun making his own calls before Pruitt even walked back to uncuff her. By the time Evelyn pulled into her driveway, there were 3 separate inquiries in motion. 1 through the Sheriff's Department's own Internal Affairs Division, 1 through the County Executive's office, and 1 through a channel that Pruitt and Farris didn't have a name for and wouldn't understand even if they did. The recording from Evelyn's phone, timestamped, geolocated, and legally obtained, was central to all of them. The Hargrove County Sheriff's Department received the formal complaint the following morning. By noon, Sheriff Raymond Bowles had been briefed. He called Pruitt into his office that afternoon, and the conversation was not long because most of the relevant facts did not require discussion. They were simply facts. Pruitt had detained a decorated Army officer without probable cause. He had handcuffed her in public. He had held her for over 20 minutes without charging her or explaining the legal basis for the stop. He had dismissed her requests for information. He had, the word Bowles used carefully, reading from the formal complaint, engaged in conduct unbecoming the professional standards of this department and inconsistent with lawful detainment procedures. Pruitt started to explain about the reports of a break-in. Bowles looked at him. "What reports?" he asked. "We have nothing in the log from that afternoon matching that description." Pruitt didn't answer, because there was no answer. There'd been no reports. There had been a silver Lexus and a black woman and a neighborhood Pruitt had decided needed watching, and he had turned that decision into a set of actions that had left marks on a woman's wrists and, as it was becoming clear, on his own career. Farris was called in separately. His account matched Pruitt's on the facts and diverged on the interpretation, which was not enough to save him, because the facts were sufficient on their own. The department placed both men on administrative leave, pending the outcome of the investigation. The investigation was not lengthy. The recording was clear. The lack of a documented basis for the stop was clear. The body camera footage. Farris had one. Pruitt did not. Because Pruitt had a documented history of technical difficulties with his department-issued camera, showed everything Evelyn had described from the angle it was available. What it did not show, but what the phone recording captured in full audio, was the 22 minutes during which Evelyn Darko-Mensah sat in the back of a police cruiser, handcuffed, for no reason that the law recognized. 6 weeks after the stop on Route 17, Dale Pruitt resigned from the Hargrove County Sheriff's Department. The department did not contest his resignation, but they did forward the full record of the investigation to the State Law Enforcement Certification Board. That board opened its own proceeding which had the effect of making Pruitt's certification, the credential required to work as a law enforcement officer in the state, subject to review. The review was ongoing. Whether he would be permitted to work in law enforcement again in this state or any state that checked records was an open question that Pruitt was now obligated to live with. Kevin Farris was terminated. Not resigned, terminated. The distinction mattered, because it meant the record of his dismissal and its cause became part of his permanent employment file, accessible to any future employer in law enforcement who ran a background check. He was 29 years old and had spent his entire adult career in a uniform. He spent the weeks after his termination trying to understand how a Tuesday afternoon traffic stop had become the thing that defined him, and finding, each time he tried to answer that question honestly, that the answer was uncomfortable. Evelyn Darko-Mensah returned to work the morning after the stop. Because she had a briefing at 0700, and lieutenant colonels in her position did not take unscheduled days off, she had documented the red marks on her wrists the night before, photographing them in good light, adding the images to the folder she had already begun assembling before she even arrived home. She had been methodical about it, not because she was angry, though she was, in the particular controlled way of someone who has learned to do useful things with that energy, but because she understood that documentation was how justice got built. You didn't shout it into existence. You constructed it, carefully, one verifiable fact at a time. She cooperated with all 3 investigations fully. She answered every question with precision. She provided the phone recording without being asked for it a second time. She did not contact the media, though the media eventually found the story through public records requests, and reported it with enough specificity that people who lived in Hargrove County understood what had happened and who'd been responsible. When a local news station requested an interview, Evelyn declined. She had a statement released through the Post's Public Affairs Office, and it read, in part, "Every person stopped by law enforcement deserves to know why they have been stopped and to be treated with dignity, regardless of who they are or what they do. The outcome of this incident should not be understood as a consequence of my rank. It should be understood as a consequence of 2 officers making a decision that was unlawful from the moment they made it." The statement was shared widely. People who had never been stopped without cause shared it. People who had been stopped many times, for reasons that operated the same way Pruitt's unspoken calculus had operated, using the same inputs, arriving at the same predetermined output, shared it with something that looked like exhaustion and recognition in equal measure. Because here is what the comments and the shares and the conversations that followed all circled back to. The question that sat underneath all the others, like a foundation: what about the ones who don't have a duty officer to call? What about the men and women who get pulled over on the same roads, put in the same back seats, have the same cuffs pressed into the same wrists, and have no recording, no rank, no institutional weight to throw against the thing that's happening to them? What recourse do they have? What records are kept? What investigations get opened? These are not rhetorical questions. They are questions that existed before Evelyn Darko-Mensah was stopped on Route 17 and will exist long after the paperwork from her case is filed and closed. The machinery that produced that stop on that afternoon does not confine itself to decorated officers in silver Lexuses. It operates daily in 1,000 variations against people whose names you will never know, because nothing afterward was remarkable enough to require an investigation. Evelyn knew this. She said as much in a follow-up communication to the county executive's office, where she recommended that the department review its stop data from the previous 3 years, segmented by neighborhood and driver demographics, to determine whether the pattern that had produced her stop was an isolated incident or a policy in practice if not in name. That review was also underway. Dale Pruitt, in the weeks after his resignation, told people who asked that he had been railroaded, that the stop had been standard procedure, that anyone in his position would have done the same thing. He said this with the conviction of someone who genuinely believed it, which was perhaps the most instructive part of the whole story. Not that a bad actor had done a bad thing and been caught, but that a man could spend 12 years making a particular kind of decision and never once understand that he was making a decision at all. He had learned to call it instinct. It had always worked before. The car, the neighborhood, the driver. The formula was reliable. It had just, this one time, produced a result he hadn't anticipated. One phone call. 22 minutes of footage and audio. One woman who stood straight and documented everything and waited for the machinery of accountability to do what it was designed to do, knowing it would, because she had the tools and the standing and the clearance to make it move. And 2 careers that ended not because someone sought vengeance, but because the record, once examined, was simply sufficient. Dignity is not a privilege you earn by holding a certain rank or making a certain call. It is not something that gets switched on when the right credentials appear on a cruiser's computer screen. It is either present from the beginning, or it is not present at all. And when it is not present, there is always a record of its absence, even when no one in power is looking. Sometimes the record finds its way to people who are looking very closely indeed. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something you're still sitting with, share it. Leave a comment. Tell us what you think justice actually requires. Not just when the person wronged is powerful, but when they are not. The conversation matters. Every voice in it matters, and so does every name that never became a story because the phone recording didn't exist. The investigation was never opened, and the machinery was never made to move. I keep thinking about the red mark on her wrist. Not the investigation, not the resignations, not the certification reviews or the county executive's office, or any of the machinery that eventually ground into motion, just that detail. The mark left by a cuff that had been put on too tight, by a man who never once stopped to ask whether what he was doing was right, only whether he could get away with it. There's something clarifying about that image, because it strips everything down to what the moment actually was, a decision. One person deciding, without evidence and without cause, that another person didn't deserve the basic dignity of being treated like a human being before the facts were known. What I find myself sitting with, after following Evelyn Darko-Mensah's story, is how much of what happened came down to character. Not rank, not connections, not the phone call itself. Character. She didn't lose her composure. She didn't beg. She didn't do any of the things fear might have pushed a person toward. She stood straight. She documented everything. And she waited. That takes something most people don't develop by accident. It's built, slowly, through years of choosing the harder right thing over the easier wrong one. That's what I'd call integrity in its truest form. Not a quality you perform when people are watching, but one that holds when everything around you is designed to make you feel small. And then there's the intelligence of how she handled it. Not book intelligence. The kind that knows when to speak and what to say and how to construct a record that will hold up. She understood that emotion without strategy as just noise. So she converted her anger into action, her experience into evidence, and her composure into the most powerful tool she had in that moment. That kind of clear-headedness under pressure is something you have to practice. It doesn't arrive fully formed. It comes from paying attention, from learning how systems work, from refusing to let a situation move faster than you're thinking. But the part that stays with me the longest is the persistence, not the dramatic kind, not a confrontation or a speech. Just the quiet, relentless decision to follow through, to cooperate with every inquiry, to recommend the demographic review of stop data that nobody asked her for, to keep pushing, not for herself alone, but towards something larger. That is a particular kind of endurance that doesn't get celebrated enough. The world tends to notice the big moments. It misses the years of showing up that make the big moments possible. Pruitt made a different set of choices. Every day, in small ways, he chose to trust his assumptions over the facts in front of him. He chose to treat authority as permission rather than responsibility. And those choices accumulated, quietly, until one Tuesday afternoon they became undeniable. That's how it works. The consequences that look sudden almost never are. They're the last visible inch of something that's been building for a long time. I think about that whenever I'm tempted to let a small dishonesty slide, or cut a corner on something that matters, or tell myself that how I treat someone when nothing is at stake doesn't define me. It does. It always does. The record is always being written, even when nobody's watching. Evelyn knew that. She built her whole life around it. And when the moment came, when two men decided on a Tuesday afternoon that she was someone they could disrespect without consequence, she had everything she needed, because she had never stopped building it. That's not luck. That's the long, slow work of becoming someone the truth can stand behind.